As we move into this topic on perception and cognition, we're going to start with some global ways of thinking, different ways of thinking that originate, back in the ancient philosophers. They come from differences between the way Aristotle perhaps laid out his worldview and people such as Confucius laid out the worldview in Asian context. So we'll start with this holistic and analytic thinking idea. The idea being analytic thinkers, they think of objects as having an existence independent of the objects around them. Holistic thinkers are more likely to fail to see the independent existence of objects, and we saw that quite clearly when we studied the Marx and Kitayama's model of the self. Because remember, in an independent view of the self, you are you. Remember, you are that yellow circle. You are all on your own. You exist. And remember, the implication is if you are tall, then you are tall at home, and you are tall at work, and you are tall everywhere you go. You have an existence separate from others. But people that grow up with more of an interdependent view of the self are more likely to view object themselves as, inherently part of a social network. And they can't necessarily view people as somehow existing independent of the people that they are interacting with. And this idea of dependence in this way, or holistic thinking, is evident in a lot of other ways. Um, we see that, say, for example, in independence tasks, what they're going to do is they're going to try to study whether or not people can view objects as an object separate from the background that they're in. And so, in a very simple field independence or field dependence task, is this one. And so the task is look at this: is the is the orange bar um, completely perfectly vertical? And it turns out people with more independent views of the self are more successful at this task because they can look at the orange bar and somehow isolate it from its background and view it as just all on its own. But people with more of an interdependent view of themselves can't isolate the orange bar and just habitually, holistically thinking, and cannot help but see it in relation to its background. So is it perfectly vertical? I think so. Paraping, it is. And so holistic thinkers are more likely to fail at this task because the gray bar right next to it is just slightly off parallel to it, just slightly. Okay. You find that this same idea exists in many other tasks, including, viewing photographs with an animal in it. Like, can you remember the animal if you change the background? And analytic thinkers are much more successful. Or here, even, how does a boy in the center feel? This is one of my favorite studies of all time. And so they hook up both analytic and holistic thinkers, Asians and Westerners, and they put on eye tracking software and they're like, okay, how does the boy in the center feel? And so what you find when doing this task, as we could predict, analytic thinkers that have an independent view of the self, if asked how is the boy in the center feeling, is going to look at the boy. But people with a more holistic thinking and more of an interdependent view of the self will habitually need to incorporate all the other children around. And this is going to create quite a conundrum for holistic thinkers because the boy in the middle is smiling, but all of the kids around him are not. Okay? And so here's what's going to happen is when using eye tracking software, the image on the left is basically what an independent thinker will do. What is the boy in the center feeling? Look at the boy. And an East Asian would, given the same basic task, will habitually, they'll start with looking at the boy, okay? But take a look where they're looking is the eyes. Remember in the last topic when we talked about emotions, we talked that East Asians are often habitually suppressing emotions. And remember what we said was it's relatively easy to suppress emotional expression at the level of the mouth, but not easy to hide it at the level of the eyes. So that's exactly where they look, is to the eyes. And as soon as they look at the eyes of the boy, then they're going to look at the other children around. Okay? So quite a powerfully different thing here. You can see right here, how much time do they spend looking at the boy in the middle. Not just where do they look, but how much time do they spend. But you find differences in analytic and holistic thinking existing historically as well. I mean, if what we said, if what I said a couple of minutes ago is true, that these differences in analytic and holistic thinking, or independent versus interdependent, arise in the ancient Greek philosophers. Well, and rephrase that, Aristotle compared to somebody like Confucius. So East versus West ancient philosophers. And so what you find is that you see it reflected here because here's a portrait. And, a portrait is like is trying to tell a story about a person, a very specific person. And here is a portrait from a Western artist. And it's you see what it is. It's just, it is this person. Here is a portrait from an Asian perspective. You see how much of the frame is occupied by the head? Nope, the entire body is involved, and there's a whole huge amount of space in the background to include. And so, again, it's a reflection that if you want to know about this person, which is what the portrait really fundamentally is, you have to know more than just the face. You find more modern takes on this same basic idea when Westerners are set task. Here's a piece of paper, here's a pencil, draw a house, okay, with no other instructions. And here's a typical house. And so in this scenario, there's what, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven objects in here in addition to the house. Okay, so you have the house plus seven other things. And so, in some kind of a ways, the person making this picture says, okay, the house has to have some details, but the house is the central point. Here's another picture. The house is not front and center, and how many details are included in this one? One, two, three. An East Asian perspective, one, two, three, four, five, I don't know, 100 different supporting objects here. So it's pretty clear that this person that drew this picture could not view a house as an object that could possibly exist independent of a much larger contextual background. It turns out that this art is shown in many other ways. I mean, the size of the portraits, the angle of the horizon, the number of objects. So it has been true historically throughout the ages, and it still remains true when modern people are given the option.